We're here tonight with Beth, and she's the author of The Green Wardrobe Guide, which is available in our library system, so you can check it out. And I am going to turn it right over to her. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me. So just by means of introduction, again, my name is Beth Fiteni, and I'm the director of Green Inside and Out. We're a nonprofit organization based in Huntington, but we serve all of Long Island. And I've been working on toxins for about 20 years now. My organization is a member of the Just Green Partnership. So we work on legislation in Albany trying to reduce toxins. Um, and I have a master's degree in environmental law. Not sure what else should say, in terms of introduction. But what I'll do now is I'll share my screen, and I have a few slides I can share with you. Oops, play from start. So everyone can see that? Okay. All right, great. So today we'll talk about creating a sustainable wardrobe, and it was partially based off of my book, which was published in 2018, called The Green Wardrobe Guide: Finding Eco-Chic Fashions That Look Great and Help Save the Planet. And I started writing that book in about 2010. So it was a good 8-year effort to get it published. It was a lot of research, but I hope it's an easy read, and it's full of some fun facts. So this presentation is basically kind of a summary of the key, items in the book. Oops. So many thanks go out to help make that book happen, to my friends, family, models, the photographers, assistants, the publisher. The Green Wardrobe Guide is dedicated to Joanne Tamman. She used to have a little shop in Greenport, and she was the one who helped inspire me to write the book. She used to sell some of the organic cotton clothing that I used to wear. And she said, if anyone should write a book, it should be you. So I did it. Unfortunately, the little shop's not there anymore. But also to my grandma Mary. She was a seamstress in Queens for many years. She used to make wedding gowns. And also to all the workers who make our clothing, so that they and their children may always have a healthy and clean environment. So if you didn't know already, the fashion industry is considered by the UN Conference on Trade and Development to be the second most polluting industry in the world. That's after the oil industry. So if any of you have seen the film called The True Cost, it's a really great film that really goes into the impacts of the fashion industry, and they use that quote as well. So diving right into what is in our clothing that is of concern. There are many, many chemicals that are used to make clothing that most people don't think about when we're going to shop. We normally just look for clothing that makes us look nice, but there's a lot more to it than that. There can be carcinogenic aromatic amines in some of the dyes. There can be allergens in the dyes. Heavy metals are used in some of the dyes and pigments. Chromium, for example, is used in the tanning of leather. And that was in that Erin Brockovich movie in California, where the chromium was in people's water and it's a carcinogen. Organotins is a class of chemicals that's used in making polyester. It's also used as a textile preservative. Chlorinated benzenes and toluenes, again, carcinogens. Flame retardants are sometimes added to fabrics, such as PBDEs, the polybrominated diethers, especially in our furniture, which we'll talk about a little bit. Those have been mostly banned in Europe, but they're still in use here in the United States. There can be, PFAS, the perfluoro chemicals, alkyl substances. So again, many, many chemicals. Formaldehyde is used to make clothing less wrinkle prone, and even phthalates. So phthalates you may have heard of in other contexts as well. They are plasticizers, and sometimes they're used in the plastic ink that go on t-shirts. And they're also used in our body care products, which we'll also talk about a little bit in this presentation. And unfortunately, they're hormone disruptors. So I know we have an FIT student here. She probably knows this, but in case others may not, polyester is made of plastic. So that has benefits in the fact that, plastic can be recyclable, but it's also there's a downside to it because 80% of polyester is manufactured using antimony as a catalyst. So, along with being a carcinogen, antimony is toxic to the heart, the lungs, the liver, and the skin. You can see the bag there. It's terephthalic acid that gets made into polyester. And now, nowadays, most of us have become aware that we have an issue with plastics in the ocean. And what's being said is that some of those little tiny microfibers are actually coming off our clothing because when we put the clothing in the washing machine, the little microfibers can, break off, and they're so tiny they actually pass through the sewage treatment plant and go out into our waterways. So that's one of the downsides of polyester, even though it is a pretty durable fabric. So that's one of the upsides. So, one of the reasons I got into wearing sustainable fabrics, which we'll talk about, is in the late 90s, I was working for an organization called Beyond Pesticides in Washington, D.C., and learned more about pesticides than I ever wanted to know. I found out that there are three basic areas of health impacts that pesticides can have on us. That's including cancer. Certain pesticides are associated with breast or other cancers, such as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Certain pesticides can disrupt our body's hormone system, which is called endocrine disruption, by mimicking or blocking our natural estrogens and other hormones. And both women and men have estrogen in our bodies. And especially insecticides can damage the nervous system, which can affect our IQ and have effects on reproductive organs. Some link pesticide exposure with Parkinson's disease and autism. So I started to learn about the fact that cotton is one of the most highly sprayed crops. It's actually responsible for basically 25% of the world's pesticide use. And that's because of that little insect you see there up in the right corner there, the boll weevil, which likes to eat the cotton plants. But what's really interesting is that there's a small but growing percentage of the overall cotton market that is dedicated to organic cotton. So that means it's grown without synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. It's grown in 18 countries, including the USA, especially down in the southern states, in India, Turkey, Peru, and China. It's grown on over 1 million acres and it's becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I think we're headed in the right direction. And there are some big companies that have agreed to start using more organic and recycled cotton products, in their products. Nike has committed to using over 50% organic or recycled cotton, and even H&M had a goal of using only water conserving, recycled, or organic cotton as of 2020. And that's very interesting because H&M within the sustainable fashion movement is very controversial because they're considered a fast fashion brand, where it used to be, new clothing was produced on a seasonal basis. Fast fashion stores like H&M produce almost constantly. Every few weeks, they're getting new shipments of clothing, which has a big impact on the environment. But at least they have now this conscious collection where you can purchase, you know, clothing made with better fabrics that are more eco-friendly. So they're trying at least. But it's really, really important when it comes to choosing organic cotton to look for the Global Organic Textile Standard, or GOTS, because that standard actually goes beyond just not using pesticides, but also looks at the whole production of the cotton, and including the workers' conditions. So the labor side of it, because that's part of sustainability as well. We want it to be sustainable for the workers, in the garment industry. So another important label to look for in that regard is the fair trade label that you see there. And that basically means that it's a certification that the manufacturing establishments that are producing the clothing are following good guidelines in terms of their laws, for their workers. And it sort of cuts out the middleman. It means that they're getting more fairly paid, most likely, rather than working in a sweatshop type condition. Just taking a sip. So a second fabric we can look for that's eco-friendly is hemp. We've been hearing quite a bit about this now in New York State, that just over the last week, that more hemp can be grown. And I want to point out that industrial hemp is what's used for making fabric. It's cannabis sativa. So it's not like you can smoke your skirt. I hear that question quite a bit. This is different than marijuana. It contains extremely little amount of the THC that would give someone a high, unlike marijuana that has, many times more. Hemp is actually a very hardy plant. It can be planted and harvested 3 times per year. And the fabric is pretty sturdy. It feels like linen, sort of. And in fact, hemp has been grown for thousands of years. They say that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson both cultivated hemp on their farms. It was used for rope and sails and other things. Even they say Henry Ford used it in some of the early cars. So very versatile plant, and I expect we'll be seeing more of it because growing in the United States, because it used to be a little expensive, I have to say, in terms of the alternative, eco fabrics, because a lot of it was being imported from Germany and other countries where it was grown. So another plant-based fiber that we can look for is lyocell. It's made from eucalyptus trees. And one of the name brands that we're most likely to see is Tencel. Um, the lyocell uses less water than cotton. Cotton is a very thirsty plant. But again, the majority of lyocell is produced by an Austrian company called Lenzing. So that's the Tencel name brand. And they pride themselves on recycling almost all of their processing fluids. So almost nothing that's toxic is being released out into the environment from their manufacturing plants, which are in Austria, as well as I think they have one here in the United States in Alabama. Modal is another type of cellulosic fiber made specifically from the cellulose of beech trees. And you can see in the picture there how it goes from wood to pulp, and then it goes through these spinnerets to make the fiber that's made into the thread. And that picture there of the tank top is from Ann Taylor. She tends to use a lot of Tencel and Modal in her clothing. Oh, and Modal, it's made specifically from beech trees. I think I said that. So another controversial issue within the realm of sustainable fashion is bamboo. I included in my book because, it is a plant-based fiber. Bamboo is actually a type of grass that grows back very rapidly. So in that sense, it's sustainable because it can be produced without a lot of pesticides. And the fabric that's made from bamboo is very soft. It's often used to make yoga clothing, socks, even towels and sheets. But the problem is that there are some pretty strong chemicals like sodium hydroxide and carbon disulfide that are used in the processing of cellulose. So in that sense, it's not really the best in terms of the eco-friendly options. And hopefully things can change. I mean, the cellulose can be removed manually, but doing that is very labor intensive, so it makes the fabric very expensive. Oops. So some other really cool fabrics that are coming out now that are plant-based include soy fabric. It's called Aslan. There's Cupro that's made from the regenerated cellulose derived from the cotton bud waste. It's like everything else but the cotton ball itself. So it's making use of more of the plant. Ingeo is made from corn biopolymers. So it's kind of like if any of you have seen those plastic cups that they say are made from corn, similar process there. It's almost like a polyester alternative. C-cell is made from algae fiber. That's pretty cool. And here's one that's much more common. Linen is made from flax. So the same plant that you can get flax seeds from to get your omega-3s, we also get linen from that. So another more sustainable fabric is recycled polyester. It's made from plastic number 1, PET. So it can be made from recycled bottles, like drinking water bottles. And there are some really pioneering companies like Patagonia that are actually taking back their polyester clothing and recycling it back into new clothing. So that really kind of closes the loop, which is an interesting concept. Again, we already talked about the issues with polyester in terms of the microfibers, but at least the benefit of recycled polyester is we're keeping the clothing out of the landfill for a longer period of time. So giving it a longer life. And also something that we can look for if we're pursuing a more natural, eco-friendly wardrobe is to look for natural dyes. So I have a few t-shirts and things that are made with hemp, and they actually use natural dyes. And there are some really vivid colors that can come from just, minerals and plants. Indigo, for example, sort of the color of the sweater on top, which is it's made from soy fabric. It's, a nice bluish purple color, especially like in India, they use it quite a bit. So I don't want to linger too long on this slide because it's really awful, but I do think that it's something that, people who want to be sustainable should just be aware of, that, the leather industry does sort of push the meat industry. And I think, as many of us may know at this point, um, meat and dairy is considered about 18% of the world's responsible for 18% of the world's greenhouse gases, really has a big impact on the environment in terms of water and, the waste from animals. So it's something to consider in terms of using virgin leather, um, versus recycled leather. But there are some alternatives coming out, like muskin, which is made from mushroom skin. Pinatex is an alternative that's coming from pineapple skin that they're turning into a leather alternative. I've even seen shoes made from apple skin. So it's not perfect. I know, chemicals are still used to process it, but it's getting there. So it's an improvement. Wool, they don't necessarily kill the sheep, but it's not a pleasant process. Sometimes there's a process done called mulesing, where they have to sort of cut the wrinkles of the skin towards the back of the sheep, because otherwise it can get fly strike because maggots grow in the fur, and really disgusting. Fur, they electrocute animals for that. Although today it was in the news that Saks Fifth Avenue said they're no longer going to use fur. So that was a pretty big move. Snakes and alligators, they skin them alive. It's just really gross. I don't want to gross anybody out, but it's just to be aware of, down, though it's very soft, is plucked from the chest of live ducklings. So all these things have impacts. But in the case of silk, instead of killing the silkworms, there's an alternative called tussa, where they let the worm come out of the chrysalis, what's it called? And it's allowed to live onward, and it's instead of boiling them alive. So chapter 6 of my book was talking about the high-end brands that you might see on the runway. Versace, Dolce and Gabbana, Prada, Chanel, all of these. And I was really hoping to write a chapter saying, like, look, these huge companies are now using some of these sustainable fabrics. But unfortunately, we looked at about 50 companies from around the world, and we found that very few of them were actually using, at that time, it's now, a couple of years ago, were using any of these sustainable fabrics that we talk about. And, again, like going back to the animal fabrics, they'll make, alligator skin bags and charge hundreds of dollars for it. But if people only saw what went on behind the scenes, it's really not something you would think of as luxury, that's for sure. But also, we were looking for sustainability plans or sustainability statements from these companies, and we only found 14 out of the 50 that had them. So again, this is only a few years ago, so I think things will keep changing. And we'll be moving more in the right direction because there's so much consumer pressure now and interest in sustainability. So, in addition to fabrics, one of the impacts that our wardrobe can have on the environment is comes through the way we take care of our clothing and through the laundering process. So, the best thing that we can do is to use eco-friendly bio-based detergents that have the least amount of fragrance. Because remember, I mentioned those chemicals called phthalates. Well, phthalates are used in fragrances to make the fragrance last longer. So it's kind of interesting when I see the commercials on television now for Gain and some of these other products where they say, "Oh, I washed this a month ago and it still smells nice." Well, it's unfortunately actually due to the use of these phthalates, which are hormone disruptors. So just something to keep in mind. Also, in terms of our environmental impact when doing laundry, if we use warm water rather than hot, whenever it's possible to use less energy. You can also buy these laundry balls. They have the ceramic orbs in them that change the pH of the water to remove dirt instead of having to use any detergent at all. Now there's even these sheets you can use, like biodegradable sheets that come in a paper box. So lots of cool ways we can be greener. And when it comes to dry cleaning, Green Inside and Out a few years ago actually issued a white paper regarding the use of PERC or perchloroethylene. That's what most dry cleaners use, and it's a known carcinogen. It's classified by the EPA as a probable human carcinogen. So there are some alternatives now available here on Long Island and elsewhere. One is wet cleaning, which, like it sounds, they put it in a machine that wets the clothing, but it's a specialized machine, and they use some special kinds of detergent, and it's actually safe for dry clean only clothing. There's also another alternative called Green Earth. It's a silicone based solution that's also safe for dry clean only clothing. So that's the kind that I use. So on our website on greeninsideandout.org, you can find a listing of the local greener, dry cleaners. And a big success that we had a few years ago was we worked with Suffolk County legislator Kara Hahn. And in Suffolk County, now if you go into a dry cleaner, they're required to have a sign on the wall that's color coded that tells you what type of chemical is being used or what, the solution or method is being used and how sort of green and safe or eco-friendly it is. So that was a real, nice thing that we had done right here in Suffolk County. So in terms of bedding and housewares, it's kind of part of having an eco-friendly wardrobe. Um, we can look for organic cotton and hemp or, bamboo sheets, tencel sheets, and pillows as well. Because one of the issues with our furniture is that there's a lot of fire retardants used in anything that contains polyurethane foam. That's including, mattresses, couches, things like that. And polyurethane foam and also adhesives may contain ethylene oxide, which is a probable carcinogen as categorized by the EPA. So since we sleep, at least 6 to 8 hours a night in our bedding, we should, consider some more natural alternatives. And for example, they may use either wool or borate which is an inert substance as the fire retardant in these alternative mattresses. And you can find them online. They're becoming more common now. So I just wanted to point out that children are very susceptible to the toxic effects of chemicals. So it's always important to protect children as much as we can from chemicals. Some flame retardants are used in pajamas. There was a law put in place a couple of decades ago that required, especially any sort of loose um, clothing, garments for children would have fire retardants in it because the idea was in case they crawled next to a candle and caught on fire. So normally if you have leggings that are tight to the skin, they may not have the flame retardants in it. But again, this is being looked at by many states and many advocacy organizations because the flame retardants can have, is associated, you can see there, with attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, slow mental development, things like that. So it's in nursing pillows, cribs, changing pads. So anything with that foam, we just want to be aware of. And of course, in terms of clothing, it's really exciting to see there's quite a few companies now that offer organic baby clothes. And in the book, The Green Wardrobe Guide, we found a whole list of them. So there's tons of them in there. You can even find organic baby clothing in Bye Bye Baby. So becoming much more mainstream. So also regarding having an eco-friendly wardrobe, I just wanted to quickly mention that part of it is our makeup, how we look, make ourselves look beautiful is not just with our clothing, it's with our makeup as well. So right now under US law, cosmetic products and ingredients do not need the Food and Drug Administration to approve them before they go on the market, except for color additives. So a lot of people may not realize that, but unless there are complaints about people having reactions to things, that's the only time the FDA will look at, maybe pulling something off the shelf. So Environmental Working Group, which is a terrific group down in Washington, D.C., a few years ago did a study called Skin Deep on these body care products. And they found that 1/3 of them contained at least one chemical linked to cancer. So we just want to be aware that when we're looking for, creams and shampoos and things that we put on our bodies, they can contain those phthalates, like I mentioned earlier, as well as parabens. These are used as antimicrobial preservatives, and they're weakly estrogenic. So they can act in concert with our own natural estrogen, putting us potentially at greater risk for breast cancer. Nail polish contains formaldehyde, toluene, which are both carcinogens, phthalates. Um, Black hair dye can contain coal tar. It's actually just like it sounds. It's like the ash from coal. But what's exciting is that there are many alternatives. There are many companies making more eco-friendly options for our body care. And EWG put together this terrific app called Healthy Living. So when you're standing at the store and you're not sure, you can actually put the name of your product in, and their database will show you, most likely they have thousands of products in there. They give you a ranking of how green or eco-friendly the product is. So it's pretty cool. So overall, just, coming back to the issue of the fashion industry and where we need to go from here. Um, Obviously, more attention needs to be paid to the environmental impacts. Um, First of all, to the wearer, because we're not exactly sure how many of the chemicals will, actually go into our skin. The skin is the largest organ of our body. So especially when we're perspiring, there's a potential for chemicals in the clothing to enter our bodies. And of course, it's a big issue with garment workers. So in addition to that film called The True Cost, there was another documentary made called River Blue, and it was all about how we make blue jeans. And that really showed, the impacts on the communities where these jeans are made and the chemicals and things like that. So I highly recommend that. It's called River Blue. We also need to look towards cradle to cradle manufacturing, or now it's called, a circular fashion economy, to reduce waste, kind of like we were talking about before with Patagonia, making one garment into another, or turning a jacket potentially into a vest, just giving things a longer life to keep things out of landfills longer. And what we're learning is that from the companies that do recycle, 100% fabrics are easier to recycle, because when you blend the fabrics like cotton and polyester, it's harder to then, separate the two in order to recycle the material. So like, unfortunately, Lycra and spandex are not recyclable right now because they literally just gum up the machines where they're processed. So I'm hoping that some, brilliant student, like maybe we have online here, will come up with a solution for this someday. Another thing we need to do is have more transparency in the clothing labels. the labels now are required by, federal law to have certain information. There's the size and there's the care label that goes onto it. But, if there was a little more storytelling behind each garment so people could make good choices as consumers, that's very important. And also, just even on the back end, the traceability of how items are handled along the supply chain. Because Green Inside and Out is a member of the New York City Fair Trade Coalition, which is a wonderful organization. I highly recommend any student join them. But the people who work in the field tell me, like, we want to source good fabric, but it's hard to tell, from basically how it was handled all along the way, because sometimes fabric may, cotton may be grown in the United States and then go to China for processing and then go to Italy for, finishing touches. So it's really hard to trace. But there are organizations that are working on that. And another thing is just the creation of standards. Like we mentioned already, there's the Global Organic Textile Standard. There's another one called the it's the European Union's EcoTex Standard, um, the Blue Sign Standard. These are all basically RSLs, that's restricted substances lists. Um, the HIG index by the Sustainable Apparel Coalition also incorporates the rights of the workers and things like that. It's more focused on the human element. So it's great that we see these standards coming around, and many companies joining in to have that on their label, because it's important. It's like it's more of an assurance that if they're making claims, that they're true. So some tips from the very get-go when you walk away from this presentation: how can we start to green our wardrobe? Um, One of the biggest things is that, from some of the research I've done and conferences I've been to, currently 85% of clothing is ending up in landfills. That's according to the EPA. So first of all, we need to decide if we really need it. Is this just an impulse buy when we're at the mall and we say, oh, this looks nice, but you don't really need it? If we can reduce our use, that would be the first step. And if you do need something, then we can determine if it can be found at a thrift store or a consignment shop or some, online reselling sources like eBay, things like that. Etsy is great. When you do need new clothing, to seek some of the natural fabrics that have the least environmental impact, like we talked about today. Also, launder your clothing using eco-friendly methods. And instead of tossing salvageable clothing, to mend it. If a button falls off or a zipper is broken, it's just a matter of sewing it back on. So getting out our sewing kits actually is really a great way to help the environment. And finally, when we're ready to get rid of a piece of clothing, to donate it, especially if it's in good condition, back to a thrift store so that it can be reused. And along those lines, I've gotten quite a few questions about, people asking, well, what happens to all those clothes that the thrift stores can't sell? Like, if there's something with a stain on it, or it's just really beyond repair. Um, we've actually been doing some work with a company called Helpsy, and they informed us that there's a whole system that goes on behind the scenes. So the clothing from thrift stores that doesn't sell, or that get put in bins, for example, will get sorted. The best pieces are often sent to developing nations, to third world countries, where there's a secondary resale market, which is pretty interesting. There was a documentary about that as well. It's called The Secret Life of Clothing. And if it's really, not resellable, a lot of fabric ends up getting shredded and turned into material for rags and the insulation, and even the stuffing inside of car seats and things like that. So pretty interesting stuff. Maybe not a perfect system, but it's still the best thing we can do to donate, to keep clothing out of the landfill. And it's something else for our student there. Maybe you already know about them, but um, there is a company in the city called Fab Scrap, and they take the bolts of material that might be left over from a manufacturer that they can't use, like if they bought extra, for example, and they resell it. So again, keeping those bolts of fabric that would otherwise end up in the landfill, out of the landfill and making it reusable, which is really cool. Upcycling. So, where do you find eco fashions? For years I've been going around wearing my organic cotton and hemp and everything, and people always say, "Where do you find it? I want to buy some too." So, in the book that we created, the Green Wardrobe Guide, there's a list of over 200 stores. There was one in at least one in almost every state in the country, which is really exciting. We did a state by state listing. California has the most, of course, not surprising. And there's also a list of clothing brands that are specifically focused on menswear. So it's not just all women's wear. There's at least 20 that I found that were all about the guys. Plenty of opportunities, online for eco fashion. So I put this just in for fun and inspiration because several years ago, through the Fair Trade Coalition, I was able to go to the Fair Trade Summit in Peru, in Lima. And we actually got to meet these women that were making textiles, in the mountains of Peru. And they showed us all those beautiful colors that you see are from just the natural environment that they live in, from the minerals and the plants around them. They're able to boil it. And they use, I think it was some kind of salt and maybe vinegar as the mordant to hold it to the fabric. So it was just so inspiring to see that, and I said, well, if they can do it, the rest of us can too. So that's it. I'm happy to take any questions. My contact information is there. Um, if anyone's interested, I do a radio show on WUSB Stony Brook as well on Friday evenings, all about environmental issues. So,
That was great. A lot of information.
thank you.
Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask? I know someone had wanted to know the title of your book again, so I put that in the chat box there, The Green Wardrobe Guide. As I mentioned earlier, the library system does own it, so you can check it out
Yay.
with your library card
Thank
if you're
you.
interested. I always wondered about those laundry balls. How do they work, or do they really work? Like,
Yes, actually, I've used one for a few years, and they last for about, they say anyway, 1,000 washes. But I definitely used it at least a few hundred times, and it does seem to work. I mean, if you have a really tough stain, you might want to put a little soap just on that area, but otherwise works pretty well. And
okay.
questions I get too about the dryer, the dryer sheets and things. Those contain a lot of chemicals as well. So there's usually more natural alternatives you can put in, like a little essential oil into the laundry will make things smell fresh.
Oh, okay. Good to know. And I was thinking about the children's pajamas with the flame retardants. I have a few little ones, so I know about
Yeah,
those.
yeah. I have to say it's really, really inspiring that, anytime I go, or, pre-COVID, when I would go into New York City and go to the workshops about sustainable fashion, it's just, filled with millennials. And there's lots of students from LIM College and Parsons and FIT. It's part of their, sustainability curriculum now. So I really do think that things are going to go in the right direction. But I definitely want to point out, like, we as consumers are the ones pushing that. So we do have power to help move things in the right direction.
Great. We do have a question. How do you find your radio station?
Oh, okay, sure. It's WUSB 90.1 FM. So the website I think is WUSB.FM. And I do a show once a month on Fridays at 6 p.m.
Great.
And it's on our website as well, greeninsideandout.org. And my friend there, Courtney, who you see, who's a guest also, she does a show as well on alternating Fridays. It's always something great about the environment, 6 p.m.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Any other questions? Fifth Friday, April 30th is her next one, she says.
Yes. Oh, yes, I
Okay,
see all your questions. Thank you so much. Yeah, and feel free, if you think of something afterwards, feel free to email me.
great. And we'll be seeing you again on the 22nd on Earth Day.
Yay. We'll talk about toxins, more about toxins. So definitely check
Perfect.
out the Fair Trade
All right.
Coalition.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Will do. Okay. Have a great